I'd like to introduce our moderator, Jennifer Collins, and our esteemed guests, Dr. Edward Smith, Derrick Morgan, Steve Glickman, and Cassius Butts. Thank you.
Hello, hello. People could come in and take their seats. You know, there's a bit of a shuffle in between.
Look away.
Well, thank you, everyone. My name is Jennifer Collins. It's a pleasure to be in the great city of Atlanta. I am joined by esteemed colleagues in the space, and we are here to talk about opportunity zones. By way of quick introduction, I work at something called the Beeck Center for Social Impact and Innovation at Georgetown. So we are situated on Georgetown's campus. We are a center that incubates scalable leading-edge ideas for social impact and to drive innovation across the country. We do our body of work in two verticals. One is finance, a fair finance initiative, where we really take a look at the systems and structures undergirding capitalism that perpetuate inequity. And then we have a whole other side of our center that focuses on data and digital initiatives in service of the common good. I run our Opportunity Zones team, where our North Star is really supporting the original intention of the legislation, which is to drive positive social outcomes in underserved communities. And so I am very excited to be in this conversation, in this dialogue today. It is my personal conviction that unlikely partnerships and uncommon coalitions really going to unlock the promise within Opportunity Zones. And so we're here to discuss and be in dialogue with practitioners in the field and those who are really doing the hard work of unlocking the promise within Opportunity Zones. So without further ado, I want to hand it over to Steve Glickman. Steve is people have called him the godfather of Opportunity Zones, but he is one of the masterminds behind the legislation. So I would love for Steve to explain Opportunity Zones, level set this room just in terms of education, explain a little bit about the original intention of the legislation and how you see the market unfolding so far.
Thanks, Jen. First, I just want to talk about socks just for a second. I'm a little disappointed that my co-panelists wore such boring socks to this program.
I'm sad I couldn't wear my Jordans. I didn't know that that was possible.
I thought we had coordinated ahead of time, but so I won at the sock game. My background is mostly in economic policy. I worked for President Obama during his first term, focused on manufacturing communities mostly. And out of that work and then a conversation and a relationship with Sean Parker, one of the founders of Napster and Facebook, we co-founded a group called the Economic Innovation Group together, which was the architect of the Opportunity Zone program and worked closely with Congress and with folks around the country to get it turned from an idea on the back of a napkin to legislation to now a nationwide program. Maybe I'll spend just a minute talking about where that program came out of. It really came out of the idea that one of the biggest problems we have to solve as a country is the fact that after all these years of economic growth, that growth has really gone to a smaller set of places than ever before in recent US history. And that's not just true among cities, where some cities are doing better and some are doing worse, but even within cities. And Atlanta, obviously, is dealing with that challenge, as are lots of big cities around the country. And if you look at who can solve that problem, that list of players has gotten shorter over the last couple decades. It was the federal government used to do huge economic redevelopment projects, and both the political and the financial capital for that has kind of gone away. Big companies stepped into that place, and then they've really stopped investing. But there's this huge pot of passive capital sitting with private investors who have done super well during the economic recovery over the last several years. And we wanted to create a mechanism by which, through investing, they could give back. And what this program is, it's a lot of different things. It's really, however you approach it, from whatever stakeholder group you approach it from, you can utilize and tap into the Opportunity Zone program differently. If you're a city, you can use it to fund infrastructure. If you're an investor, you can use it to invest in whatever you're investing in. If you're a community group, you can use it to fund affordable housing or charter schools or renewable energy. It's a tool to bring capital to the table as long as you're willing to invest for a long period of time, typically a decade or more. So you're a patient investor, you're going to come with skin in the game, you're investing equity, and you're doing it in a way that creates economic growth in the community. And you have to do all those things in order to really take advantage of this incentive. So we're at the beginning, the first inning of what I think is a huge industry. Tens of billions of dollars a year could be invested in this program. Probably $10 billion has already been invested in opportunity zones around the country. There are 8,700 of them. They're in all 50 states. They're in 5 U.S. territories. And what you're seeing now is this very robust partnership emerging between cities, like in Atlanta, governors, the federal government, across party lines, and the private investor community. And I think you're going to see some really big, exciting things happen in this space over the next few years.
Thank you, Steve. So that's a great segue over to my colleague, Ed, who is representing your great city of Atlanta. And curious, Ed, as to how you're seeing the Opportunity Zone landscape unfold at the local level here in Atlanta.
Okay, yeah, so perhaps I can just start with a little bit of my background. I come from an alternative finance space. I'm the former Deputy Director of Development and Planning at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Did a lot of work in the EB-5 program, worked on the first deal in New York City, $60 million capital raise, estimated 1,200 jobs. Based off that experience and research I've done around alternative finance, I was tapped to head the Opportunity Zone initiative here in Atlanta. I'm the Chief Opportunity Zones Officer at Invest Atlanta. The mission of Invest Atlanta, broadly speaking, is to create healthy and sustainable communities here in Atlanta, and we've developed an Opportunity Zone initiative designed to promote social impact throughout the city. To be brief, our Opportunity Zone initiative covers 4 key components: identification of projects, identification of funds seeking to invest in social impact projects, community engagement, and data and reporting. So throughout our Opportunity Zone initiative, we're working to provide the positive economic outcomes that were just mentioned to support the residents here in Atlanta.
Fantastic, thanks, Ed. And that's a great segue into just a brief conversation about the Beeck Center put forward as a way to really drive impact across the ecosystem, given that it's not mandated at the federal level. What's called the Opportunity Zone Impact Reporting Framework. It's housed at ozframework.org, and we have 5 guiding principles to be considered an impact player. We ask for a commitment to community engagement, first and foremost. We ask for a lens on equity. We ask for transparency, so be open and honest and transparent about what you're doing, a real commitment to a social outcome, and then measurement along the way. So we're really grateful that Ed and his team are helping promote that framework and that methodology of thinking to really drive towards more do-gooding and positive social outcomes in these neighborhoods.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in right there, one of the things that we found at Invest Atlanta is that the data and reporting piece is very important in the implementation of our initiative. So we are a supporter of that framework. Another thing that we've done in lieu of the federal mandate on reporting requirements is create a project sponsor agreement. So every project that wants to come about in Atlanta doesn't necessarily have to play in our sandbox, but for those that do, we are working with them to provide data and other information on number of jobs created, the census tract where the jobs were created or where the projects occurred, affordable housing units, and other social and positive economic impacts that are associated with the implementation of the Opportunity Zone initiative.
Great. Cassius, I want to bring you into the conversation here and just allow you to introduce yourself. And this Opportunity Zone legislation has brought a few more people to the sandbox that you've been playing in for a while. So if you could tell us a little bit about your work.
Certainly, certainly. I've started out my career in banking and finance, left there and was a presidential management fellow during the Bush administration at HUD, so I got a chance to see real estate from a different perspective, from a government perspective. Left there and ran the Small Business Administration for the Southeast for President Obama for both his terms. That brought me to where I am today, helping people to realize their entrepreneurial dreams. And that really boils down to the people who are here in this room that want to talk about opportunity zones, talk about investments. As CEO of Capital Fortitude Business Advisors, we help small and mid-sized businesses and communities and corporations all together to invest into enhancing just folks' lives. It's really just that simple. And so we talk about the legislation that is out now. We were fortunate to be asked to attend the initial briefing of the Opportunity Zone and Revitalization Council back in April. It was at that time when many of you all would have gotten an opportunity to hear about what are these opportunity zones? How does it work for you? There's over 6 million properties in the United States that are located and available in opportunity zones. And so we've helped to identify people to invest or to be a part of a fund in those areas. But I think the more important part is where we are today, and to talk about how can the folks here in the audience and the people who are looking online and over the television to hear about how can I be a part of this. People made a huge push. Derrick and I had a brief conversation about this, briefly I was going to go into talking about Wall Street had a chance to be bailed out, if you will, and people said, well, what about us? This is your chance. This is your, no pun intended, this is your opportunity to really talk about what can you do to really invest into your dollars. And so I'll pause there because I even think talking about the story that Derrick has to resonate about people who have a chance to invest into their future in their communities, this is how you can do it. Last but not least, we were started an initiative with the NFL and the NFL Players Association to talk about athletes investing into their future. And so this is, I think, is a great segue to take a step back and talk about how this happened, Derrick, and how can people in the audience be a part of it too.
I love when people do my job for me, so this is great. It's a great tee up to Derrick and his story. And I will say that nationwide, this is a really phenomenal homegoing story for a lot of athletes and influencers, and very grateful to have one of them on stage with us today. So Derrick, would love to hear about your journey story to this landscape and this world, and why you're choosing to spend your time here and what you're hoping to do.
Yeah, so I just finished up a 9-year career with the Tennessee Titans and went to school here at Georgia Tech. And getting drafted into the league, I was very self-centered. It was all about me. It was the Derrick Morgan show, and it was just trying to get the accolades that come with the NFL. And my rookie year ended up tearing my ACL, and my whole season was over. And during that process, it was really a very uncomfortable moment in my life, because it really forced me to wake up to see that the world is bigger than just the NFL, and that I was blessed with a very rare platform to use it for the positive change of others in communities in which I come from. And so throughout my journey in the NFL, I was very intentional about what I did off the field. We were talking offline about how much time that you have in a calendar year, and you really have like this 3-month window of time that's actually yours. And so during that time, to be real, it's like that's when a lot of guys get surgeries and take care of their bodies. And while I was still doing that as well, I was sprinkling seeds in different industries and businesses, and went and got my MBA, and was realizing, okay, like this isn't gonna last forever. And so you kind of alluded to it earlier, Jennifer, when you said a lot of athletes, entertainers, influencers, we want to come home. We want to come back to the communities in which we come from. But I think a lot of the times we have outdated playbooks. We can't keep doing football camps and back to school drives and things that you're going to disrupt systemic cycles. They've been in place by intention. They've been put in place. And so I think with my personal journey, a couple of years ago, I started impact investing and taking my money out of the market into more tangible investments that I could touch and feel, whether it's affordable housing or a company called Bitwise that gives technology training to underserved minorities in Fresno. And so for me, that was very impactful, and I felt good about that, but I was in a silo. I wasn't really collaborating with anybody. And so when the Opportunity Zone program came out, to be honest, I wasn't a big fan of it. When I first was reading the articles, I was like, okay, here we go.
Derrick, I thought we talked about this ahead of time. It was only positive.
I'm sorry, bro. I'm sorry. I forgot you were on the panel, Steve. So I'm getting to the good part. So when I was reading these articles, I'm like, man, this is just a tax credit for gentrification. if we don't have framework and reporting standards, it's going to be the wild, wild west. And so the more and more I thought about it, I'm like, you know what, this is going to happen with or without me. I might as well get involved and use my platform as a voice and an advocate for the communities in which I come from. I looked on a map. Everywhere I ever lived is an opportunity zone. I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know we were poor. That was just my normal. But when I go back into these communities, it's like there's no opportunity. There's no hope. And so I think when you have private capital flowing into these communities, you need to have somewhat of a translator in the middle, because there's two tax brackets of people that usually don't talk to each other. So without all the stakeholders and interested parties at the table communicating, stuff's gonna fall through the cracks. It's gonna be more displacement, more gentrification. So what we're doing at Kingdom Group is trying to be a voice for those who don't have one and do investments in a very responsible and equitable way.
Which is very much appreciated. And what is also needed is trust. Right, so I'm grateful to see you on stage and doing great work in this field. I'm grateful to see David Robinson using his influence the same way. I'm grateful to see David Gross, who's Nipsey Hussle's business partner, using his influence and catalyzing others. Because in order to have this dialogue be, in order to have the benefit, really benefit the communities and to really support the original intention of this legislation, we need your influence and your truth-telling to be able to help bridge the gap in between. And athletes and influencers are a great way, because you actually have capital gains yourself. So in many ways, you are the community and the investor. And there are very few people who play that hat in this world. So grateful that you're here, and really grateful for your work. So I want to go back over to Steve, who's got the most national lens on this, national view on this whole landscape right now. And just, I mean, the title of our panel is Opportunity for Increased Equity, or Boon for Private Equity. I'm sure many in the room saw the New York Times article a couple of weeks ago that's talked about one side of that question. And so curious as to how you're seeing the landscape in the market unfold now, Steve. Is it more impact? Is it more kind of really private equity focused? Are you seeing a blend?
Well, I want to jump off something Derrick said, because I think he made a good point. I'm a big supporter of the work the Beeck Center is doing, and Rockefeller and Kresge and other foundations are doing to create a model for how to do this in an impactful lens. Originally, the legislation was built in with certain reporting standards that were taken out during its passage, not really for political reasons, but for procedural reasons that aren't that interesting to go into, and I do think they're going to be built back in. But I want to talk a little bit about maybe the bigger point there, which is this program is really an experiment in doing community development, and I think it's pretty polarizing. I think some people are very excited about it, some people are very skeptical about it. A lot of people involved in this program have come to it, like you have, Derrick, and weren't sure what to make of it. Let me give you a little bit of the frame of how community development has typically worked. It's typically been very structured, and it's typically had a lot of controls from the federal government and from certain nonprofits that have allocated where money went. And we saw that as a downside, in part, because the result of that is you get a lot of capture, meaning the big buyers of traditional community development credits are big banks. And the allocators are the federal government, and they tend to be really risk averse in what they're willing to invest in. They invest in lots of pretty safe commercial real estate projects because you're not going to lose that money. We really wanted to create a program that could be used to scale up growth businesses, which is a riskier form of investment, that could be used in renewable energy, that could be used to build infrastructure. And the only way to do that is to open that up to the market, so that folks like Derrick and Luol Deng and David Gross and Nipsey Hussle and other folks who would have probably never gotten involved with a super complex, highly regulated program run by the federal government could be fund managers and intermediaries and champions and major movers of capital in this program. It's going to create some downside, though. There are going to be players in this market that don't care about communities. That's a byproduct you get of any incentive. And the flip side, this is going to be way more accessible to way more investors and way more fund managers that have a model that they want to grow. And it's an experiment. We're going to see what happens. But I'll tell you, there is no one else who can solve the problems this program is trying to solve besides crowdfunding it, I think, in the way we're trying to crowdfund it, because we've spent 50 years waiting for federal government, state governments, local governments, philanthropy companies to solve the problem, and they haven't. In fact, most people argue the problem has gotten much worse. That's certainly what the data shows over the last 10 years or so. And so I think Derrick was right. The best way, if you're skeptical about a program that's heavily leveraging private capital, is to come in there and be a part of the program, be a part of what's happening in communities. I do think the funds that will do the best are not going to be the funds investing in New York City, and they're not going to be the funds investing in really safe real estate projects, because those types of models don't have the same growth potential, and this is a program that incentivizes growth. If you're not investing in a highly growing investment, this incentive won't be that useful or attractive to you. If you're investing in markets that have a lot of room for growth, which is a bunch of the middle of the country where their whole downtowns may be opportunity zones, and you're investing in high growth businesses, you're building something from scratch, you're taking something that's pretty dilapidated and turning it around to something useful, you can make money in this program because you're creating a lot of economic value where there wasn't before. So I do think the market will sort itself out. And if you look at what's really happening on the ground now all over the country, including in Atlanta, I work with a group in Atlanta, Aru Brothers, which took over Tyler Perry's old studio and is using it to build essentially a national production and film company focused on women-centered and minority-centered content and creators. And they could have never done that without this program, because they could have never raised the scale of capital they need. I don't know if Derrick would say the same thing, because he's been an active investor for years, but putting words in his mouth and then he can debate it. I bet this is enabling you to do stuff at a different scale than maybe without this program. And that's really what this program was designed to do. It won't work in all cases. It's not going to scratch everyone's itch, but it does allow a democratization of what's typically a closely guarded community development industry.
Derrick, do you want to?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I definitely would. Is it a silver bullet? No. But is it increasing the access to participants who want to get involved? Absolutely. And I think that even from where I come from, within the locker room, like, it's sometimes hard to work together on things that are not football related and sports related. But I think with something like this, where you do have the culturally relevant, stakeholders like a T.I. or a David Gross or a Luau Dang that are in this, is making it more relevant to those communities and those participants. So I 100% agree with increasing the access to the program and getting the right participants in it.
Yeah, we've seen from an impact perspective that, from an impact and innovation perspective, the most precious thing about opportunity zone legislation to us is the conversation swell around it. So you're bringing together athletes, influencers, private equity folks, the world of philanthropy, the world of both federal and local government. And these folks have never been in the same room together. That's where innovation comes from, and we do need new models of community investment. Section 8 housing comes from the 1937 Homestead Act. So we haven't had, since New Markets tax credits, we haven't had another initiative in community development, and that was 15 to 20 years ago. So we are in dire need of new models. We are seeing creativity form, and we're seeing this legislation is not going to make bad deals good. It will make good deals great, and it will make deals that are on the margins de-risked enough that people can take a swing at impact for traditional investors who would have never taken a chance on it before. So Ed, you're nodding your head. You want to?
Yeah, absolutely. I just like to hop in there when we're discussing the fact that some funds may just simply be market-oriented and not social impact funds. But one of the innovative things that we've done down here in Atlanta is we released Social Impact Partners RFQ, and we had a number of funds, 10 funds to be exact thus far, who have self-identified as social impact partners, and they're actively working to invest in projects that lead to affordable housing, grocery stores and food deserts, make investments in the types of projects that lead to jobs that have economic mobility. So we've been focused on this and recognize the fact that every fund that comes to Atlanta might just be looking for the highest rate of return, but how can we capture those funds or those potential project partners who are trying to seek these economic outcomes that we're working towards?
Cassius, are you seeing any interesting impact activity in opportunity zones in your world?
I'm seeing a lot of interesting activity. And I'll go back to one of the roles I play is chairman of Fort McPherson, located here in Atlanta. And so, Steve, you're familiar with the folks there, which is also located in the Opportunity Zone. My biggest thing is making sure that people have the opportunity to participate. Because the legislation is put together, people are able to participate and start funds, but what are we really doing about making sure that people are engaged and involved? And so when we talk about what are we doing, the activity is there, and people want to know more and more, how do I get involved? Steve, I think you can talk about the project there in Southwest Atlanta. It's in down the street from Greenbrier Mall, which is an undeveloped portion of Southwest Atlanta. There has not been any development in Southwest Atlanta in the last 40 years besides what's taking place between Fort McPherson as well as the media industry. And so how can the community get involved? We've had to do a better job by reaching out to our respective communities and say, hey, this is how you really create jobs, right? This is how you really create opportunities. So you got to play both roles. You know, you have to find a way to balance between the two. And if you don't do that, it will blow up in your face. And so I'm more or less from that perspective of getting the people who have the opportunity to invest and to be investors and to be fund managers. But I'm also on the other end to make sure that people have opportunities to play a role. Corporations can do that as well too. Had a great conversation with the folks here. Pedro Cherry, who's in the back room, who's representing Southern Company, has been very involved in making sure that people know about how can jobs be created in these respective opportunity zones. So we have to make sure that the 3P process is in place, right? It's not just creating jobs, not bringing people within our communities, but how are you engaging communities? If we don't do that, we're going to find ourselves in a not so comfortable place. But I think we're in the right place.
How are you engaging communities?
Absolutely. So how we're doing it is actually, I have to give a shout out to Artie, creating platforms like this, making sure that people have a place to come to learn about opportunity zones and also how to play in that role. If you go to cdfifund.gov, you can find out all the Q&As of how to get involved in opportunity zones across the country. This is Atlanta. It's a great kickoff. But after this conference, we should have more conversations. And I'm glad you actually, Jennifer, offered to us to stay in touch. And the rest of us, we're going to stay in touch so we can duplicate this effort across the country. And that's how we do it.
Yeah, we're trying to help this effort too. We put together an Opportunity Zone Investor Council. I have a background in commercial real estate investment and development myself, so we're trying to put together an Opportunity Zone. We have put together an Opportunity Zone Investor Council to really cross-pollinate best practices across the country on the creativity and the new models. We have 3 CDFIs, so these are folks that have been in underserved communities for 40+ years, and some traditional real estate investors and developers as well. So that's our initiative in order to really, from an investor lens, try and promote impact across the country. Derrick, I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about your work focus. I know you're involved in some, and you're focused on a few specific cities, and what really made you point there, and what are your hopes for the work you have going on?
Yeah, so initially we've identified 4 different markets: Austin, Nashville, Atlanta, and the Philadelphia area. For the reason being that we all have, I say we, my partners Kendrick Whittington and Brendan Doherty, we all have organic relationships in these areas. I grew up in the Philly area, went to school here, played in Nashville. Brendan lives here, Kendrick lives in Austin. So we have relationships with the city, with the community organizations, and we really want to get into these communities and really touch and feel and to see what's going on, to see what the needs are, because we have our assumptions, but we want to go out and almost marry our assumptions with what the community wants, what the plans for the city, from the city council are. And so one of the examples I have, I'm from Coatesville, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb of Philly, and it's an old steel town. The economy came and went with the steel industry. So now you have this depressed market in which 95% of the population are they're commuting to their jobs. There's no economy in Coatesville. And so when we go into the community, it's like, okay, we need housing, we need education, we need job creation, we need transportation, all these different things. And then we go out and we survey the community. So from the consensus from what we found was that there are no youth activities in the city. So youth are just kind of left to their own devices. Gang activity, crime is up. there's no opportunities. And so when we go in and say, okay, well, this is what we need, this is what the community wants. So for example, we're doing a holistic development around education. We're doing a charter STEM school / performing arts center, a sports complex with a convention center that the county of Chester, which is within where Coatesville is going to tenant, as well as a hotel. And we're also doing a development around the Amtrak station in the city to redevelopment to reactivate that stop. And so we always look at cities and look at our developments from a double bottom line perspective to say, is this gonna financially make sense, but is it going to have the positive social and sometimes even environmental outcomes that we wanna see? And so it's really, as I alluded to earlier, having all the participants and stakeholders at the table communicating together to kind of find a consensus to see what's gonna really impact the city and not coming from a top-down perspective, but really bottom up. And to make sure that it's equitable, that everybody's participating. Like, I'm in Nashville, and I see the cranes, and I see the high rises, and I go a mile outside the city, and I see people who are getting reported to by codes because their houses aren't in order, just so they can get out of their house, and developers can come snatch up their homes. And I'm like, this isn't right. We don't have equal participation. So I think that we have to engage the community. We have to have town hall meetings. We have to have, relationships with the community leaders and nonprofits. And so you understand what the need is. And, the more and more you can go about it like that, the more I think you're going to see better outcomes in this whole space.
Amen. So in Atlanta, Ed, if somebody in the audience is like, we're in Atlanta, we want to get involved in Atlanta, we want to have our voice heard in Atlanta, what do we do?
atlopportunityzones.com. So that is our main portal to support and promote our Opportunity Zone activity. I'd like to go back a little bit and talk about the community engagement that we're conducting here in Atlanta. Primarily, we serve as both a convener and participant for a wide number of Opportunity Zone-related events. One thing that I think that is unique about the events that we are conducting here in Atlanta is, so we'll have a fund manager show up, a CPA show up, a project show up. We'll invite a large number of communities and philanthropic partners. But we'll talk about the Opportunity Zone incentive. But also one thing that we notice is that the Opportunity Zone tax incentive might not be the best tool for everyone. So we bring in our small business and technical assistance team to walk through the other various components that can support the community holistically. We have people that come up at the events and they are an established business, but they're trying to take it to the next level, might not quite be ready for the Opportunity Zone incentive, but working with them on the development of their pitch deck, their 10-year profit and loss statement, pro formas, and helping identify what other tools and resources that we can pair with the Opportunity Zone tax incentive to achieve those outcomes. So again, if you go to atlopportunityzones.com, you'll be able to use our mapping tool like anyone else's mapping tool, but you'll be able to layer on the various other incentives that are available here in Atlanta. Also, you'll be able to see there are between 20 and 30 other incentives or tools that we can use to promote healthy and sustainable communities here in Atlanta. And one of the goals of persons like myself at Invest Atlanta and the other members of our team is to shepherd and work with the various members of our community, whether they're seeking Opportunity Zone investment or other investment, to say, hey, did you know that you're eligible for this grant or this small business loan? Or what can we do ultimately to decrease development costs or increase the rate of return to make some of these projects or deals palatable to the investor community?
Steve, we're a little short on time, but I'm interested to hear your advice or guidance on other states and cities outside of Atlanta on what you're seeing as ways to really pull the states or cities together.
I mean, this program really is a way for cities are ecosystems and organisms, and this is an opportunity for them to kind of build muscle memory and to flex muscles they haven't had to use in a long time, and that's figure out priorities that can be fueled with private capital. And there's a lot more, I think, now that will work in that context than would work a decade ago or 2 decades ago. Is it municipal infrastructure, telecom, broadband? Is it renewable energy? Is it schooling? Is it affordable housing? All of those models, is it incubators? All those models can work really well in this program. And some cities, I think, are really leading. I think Atlanta is really doing a great job Birmingham, Alabama, the mayor there, Randall Woodfin, he's doing a great job. Nan Whaley in Dayton, Ohio, a great job. Michael Tubbs in Stockton, California. Young, creative, energetic mayors with vision are going to do, I think, really well in this program. But you've also got to come to where the investors are too. You got to show them a pipeline. You've got to show them a plan that shows where the demand is going to grow in your city, where the opportunities are for investments, where the businesses are going to come to. You know, investors are pretty lazy. There's a herd mentality there. They're waiting to see demand and to invest. This is a program about creating demand. And cities can do that. States can do that with the right vision and the right outreach to mayors. I think right outreach to investors. And I think those mayors that I mentioned are ones that are leading the pack. It takes something from investors as well. They have to, I think, want to invest in places that aren't fully proven out. They have to maybe invest in places where they're from, but maybe not where they live now. If you're in San Francisco, if you're in New York, if you're in LA and DC working, you're probably from somewhere else. You probably want to go back to that other place because those cities have become uncomfortably expensive. And you know, everyone, I think, at the end of the day, wants to live an experience that's akin to how they grew up, and this is a chance to rebuild. So, I mean, we keep going back to Derrick because I think he is one of the great examples in this emerging field, but he's just one. There are examples in cities across the country where people are taking this incentive and using it as a way to recreate the community, to build the destiny that their communities haven't been able to see for a long time.
I'd like to thank all of my panelists for your hard work in driving impact and in innovating new models of community investment along the way. We're really grateful for your time, effort, and energy, and really thankful that you took the time to be here to have this dialogue with us today. So thank you.